let's open with a prayer.
Lasst uns mit Gebet anfangen.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for being together again.
Lieber himmlischer Vater, ich danke dir, dass wir wieder zusammen sein können.
And I pray that you will give us wisdom to understand all the scripture which is before us.
Und ich bete, dass du uns Weisheit gibst, dass wir die Schriften verstehen, die wir jetzt lesen werden.
And I pray that you will lead us and special bless our brother Lawrence.
Und ich bete, dass du uns führst und dass du eine besondere Segen unserem Bruder Lorenz gibst.
And I pray that you will also open our ears that we can hear like a disciple can hear.
Und ich bete, dass du unsere Ohren auftust, dass wir hören können wie die Jungen.
And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Und dies bete ich in Jesu Namen. Amen.
Okay, so I posted the notes.
Ich habe die Notizen wieder gepostet.
This is basically the same document, just made here and there a few adaptations to it.
So ist es im Grunde dasselbe Dokument. Ich habe noch der ein oder der andere Veränderung gemacht.
Okay. So yesterday we read this first chapter about the US Civil War.
So gestern haben wir diesen ersten Kapitel über den US-Bürgerkrieg gelesen.
And tonight I want to read the next one with you.
Und heute Abend möchte ich das nächste Kapitel mit uns lesen.
And it's on page number 5.
Das ist auf Seite 5.
It's called Chapter 55, Slavery in the War.
Das Kapitel 55, das heißt Sklaverei und der Krieg.
Is everybody there?
Ist jeder da?
Okay, so let's begin.
So, lasst uns anfangen.
Again, read one paragraph each.
Wir können wieder jeweils einen Absatz lesen.
Okay, and we saw yesterday that this war on slavery was basically more or less a pretense, at least by the leading men of the North.
Wir haben gesehen gestern, dass diesen Kampf gegen die Sklaverei war nur ein Vorwand, zumindest von diesen anführenden Männern des Nordens.
I mean, there were many soldiers, they were actually honest-hearted in their belief that they were fighting for the freeing of the slaves. Okay.
Es gab natürlich viele Soldaten, die ehrlich im Herzen waren, die glaubten wirklich, dass die kämpften, um die Sklaven freizusetzen.
But the majority of the leading men were basically just interested in preserving the Union, and some of them were even favoring the South. Okay.
Der Mehrzahl von den anführenden Männern, sie wollten nur den Union aufrecht halten, und sogar einige von denen haben den Süden bevorzugt.
Okay, and so there were many different conflicts of interest, and they were kind of disorganized in all their dealings in this war.
Also es gab viele Zwiespalte der Interessen oder Konflikte der Interessen. What did you say?
And therefore they were kind of disorganized in these different
Und aufgrund dessen
organizations in the war. Yeah.
Aufgrund dessen hatten sie Schwierigkeiten in den Organisationen des Kriegs.
Okay, so now let's go to the next chapter.
So gehen wir jetzt zu diesem Kapitel 55.
And we also saw that basically the whole world was looking at this war, and they were basically disgusted because they realized it was nothing about freeing the slaves, it was just preserving the Union, and they were basically allowing so many people to die.
Und wir haben gesehen, dass die ganze Welt empört war über diesen Krieg. Es ging gar nichts darüber, dass die Sklaven freigesetzt werden und dass sie es ging nur darüber, die Union aufrechtzuerhalten und dass sie erlaubt haben, dass so viele Menschen sterben.
Okay, so let's now continue with the next chapter.
So, lasst uns mit diesem Kapitel fortsetzen.
It says, God is punishing this nation for the high crime of slavery. He has the destiny of the nation in his hands. He will punish the South for the sin of slavery and the North for so long suffering its overreaching and overbearing influence. Okay, so both got punished, right?
So, beide wurden bestraft.
So, and I mean, we will see this, but this war in the Civil War, where do we place it prophetically?
Also wir werden das sehen, aber dieser Bürgerkrieg, wo markieren wir das prophetisch gesehen?
The Son-in-law crisis, right?
Sonntagsgesetzkrise.
Okay, so, and both parties, the North and the South, they were playing a role in this war, right?
Und beide Partien, sowohl des Norden als auch den Süden, hat eine Rolle in diesem Krieg gespielt.
Because what did we read yesterday when the slaves, when they escaped the South, and they came to the North?
Was haben wir gestern gelesen, als diesen Sklaven den Süden entkommen sind und sie sind zum Norden geflohen?
And how did the North reacted to them?
So, wie hat der Norden darauf reagiert, auf sie?
Yeah, they tortured them and brought them back to the
Gefoltert und zurückgesandt
slave masters, right?
zu den Sklaventreibern.
And yesterday we already understood the allegory. Yeah, the black slaves were illustrating what?
Und gestern haben wir diese Allegorie bereits verstanden, dass diesen schwarzen Sklaven stellten was dar?
Sin.
Those who,
Yeah, those that are in bondage to slavery or slavery to sin. Right?
diejenigen, die in der Gefangenschaft der Sünde sind.
So who is therefore the slave master?
So, wer ist dann der Sklaventreiber?
Yeah, Satan, right?
Das ist Satan.
Yes, Pharaoh. Okay.
Pharao.
So, and the northern government was therefore to illustrate whom?
Und das Nordregierung sollte wem denn darstellen?
Christ, right?
Christus.
Okay, so how should the North actually should have acted then when these freed slaves came to them?
So, wie hätte der Norden denn reagieren sollen, als diese entkommenen Sklaven zu sie gekommen sind?
Protected and not built them.
Exactly. Yeah?
Sie hätten sie schützen und aufbauen
Yeah, it's like
sollen.
us when we get free or escape from Satan and we turn to Christ, He receives us with open arms, right?
So ist es, wenn wir von der Sünde befreit werden und zu Christus wenden und den Satan entkommen, dann nimmt uns Christus mit offenen Armen
It's not
an.
that Christ then beats us and sends us back to Satan, right?
Stell dir mal vor, Christus wird uns schlagen und Satan zurückschicken.
It's like the man that gets his debts forgiven him and then goes out and beats on the man who owes him peanuts and puts him in prison until he pays him. It's the exact same illustration.
So, derselbe Darstellung wäre denn der Mensch, der seine großen Schuld vergeben bekommen hat und dann geht hinaus und seinen Mitknecht sozusagen wegen ein kleineres Menge ihm ins Gefängnis wirfst.
You mean in the sense that he's not acting out the role of Christ?
No, he doesn't free him from his bondage. He makes sure that he's locked up in there. You know, he puts him in bondage.
Er befreit ihn nicht von seiner Knechtschaft, sondern eher das Gegenteil.
Because the point is that the Lord had freed America from bondage,
From tyranny of people.
from tyranny, right?
So, der Sache ist es, dass der Herr Amerika von der Tyrannei des Papsttums bereits befreit hat.
And therefore they were made to be a light to the whole world and free other people from
Deswegen sollten sie ein Licht der Welt sein und anderen von ihrem Bedrängnis befreien.
Yes. And we saw what was their problem.
Und wir haben gesehen, was waren denn ihre Probleme?
What did they see and what didn't they see?
So, was haben sie gesehen und was haben sie nicht gesehen?
Well, they saw outwardly all the other nations and they couldn't see their own evil that they were practicing.
Yes.
Also sie sahen all den Übelkeit aller anderen Nationen und sie konnten nicht die Taten, die sie selbst begangen haben, sehen.
So they saw only the mode in the eyes of the other nations, but the beam in their own eyes they didn't see.
Nur den Speck in den Augen der anderen Nationen erkannt, aber den Balken im eigenen Auge haben sie nicht gesehen.
Okay. So, yes. So, therefore we can see that the Lord actually, he wanted to use this war as a means to illustrate this role play. Okay.
So, wir können sehen, dass der Herr diese Krieg benutzt hat, um diesen Rollenspiel darzustellen.
He wanted to use this war to illustrate this role play.
Also er wollte diesen Krieg, um diesen Rollenspiel darzustellen.
The North should have actually represented him. Okay.
So, den Norden hätte ihm eigentlich darstellen sollen.
Okay, but they failed. Okay.
Aber darin haben sie versagt.
Okay. So therefore it was only an imperfect illustration of what the Lord actually wanted to achieve.
So deswegen, es war eine imperfekte Darstellung dessen, was der Herr zeigen wollte.
Okay, and therefore also the North got punished. Okay.
Und deswegen, den Norden würde auch bestraft.
So now let's continue.
So, lass uns weiter jetzt.
You want to read the next second paragraph, please?
It says, at the conference in Roosevelt, New York, August 3rd, 1861, when the brethren and sisters were assembled on the day set apart for humiliation, fasting and prayer, the Spirit of the Lord descended upon us, and I was taken off in vision and shown the sin of slavery, which has so long been a curse to this nation. The fugitive slave law was calculated to crush out of man every noble, generous feeling or sympathy that should arise in his heart for the oppressed and suffering slave. It was in direct opposition to the teaching of Christ. God's scourge is now upon the North, because they have so long submitted to the advances of the slave power. The sin of northern pro-slavery men is great. They have strengthened the South in their sin by sanctioning the extension of slavery. They have acted a prominent part in bringing the nation into its present distressed condition.
Yes, this fugitive slave law, I guess, is this law that they had to send back the slaves to the south.
Also dieses Gesetz, von dem hier gesprochen ist, es bedeutet, dass die entkommenen Sklaven zurücksenden mussten.
And therefore the Lord was not punishing the north also.
Und deswegen der Herr den Norden auch bestraft.
Okay.
I was shown that many do not realize the extent of the evil which has come upon us. They have flattered themselves that the national difficulties will soon be settled and confusion and war end, but all will be convinced that there is more reality in the matter than was anticipated. Many have looked for the North to strike a blow and end the controversy.
Okay, let's go.
I was pointed back to ancient Israel, held in bondage by the Egyptians.
Okay, stop here. So what is she now doing?
So was tut sie jetzt?
Yes, she now compares this slavery to the Egyptian slavery, right?
Also sie vergleicht diese Sklaverei mit der Gefangenschaft in Ägypten.
Okay.
The Lord wrought by Moses and Aaron to deliver them. Miracles were performed before Pharaoh to convince him that these men were especially sent of God to bid him let Israel go. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened against the messengers of God, and he reasoned away the miracles performed by them. Then the Egyptians were made to feel God's judgments. They were visited with plagues, and while suffering under the effect of them, Pharaoh consented to let Israel go. But as soon as the cause of their suffering was removed, his heart was hardened. His counselors and mighty men strengthened themselves against God and endeavored to explain the plagues as the result of natural causes. Each visitation from God was more severe than the preceding one, yet they would not release the children of Israel until the angel of the Lord slew the firstborn of the Egyptians. From the king upon the throne down to the most humble and lowly, there was wailing and mourning. Then Pharaoh commanded to let Israel go, but after the Egyptians had buried their dead, he repented that he had let Israel go. His counselors and mighty men tried to account for their bereavement. They would not admit that the visitation or judgment was from God, and therefore they pursued after the children of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next paragraph, Margaret.
When the Israelites beheld the Egyptian host in pursuit, some upon horses and some in chariots, and equipped for war. Their hearts failed them. The Red Sea was before, the Egyptian host behind. They could see no way of escape. A shout of triumph burst from the Egyptians to find Israel completely in their power. The Israelites were greatly terrified, but the Lord commanded Moses to bid them go forward and to lift up the rod and stretch out his hand over the sea and divide it.
Okay, stop this for now. I just want to highlight this thought because I found it pretty nice.
Also diese Gedanke möchte ich nur hervorheben, denn ich habe das schon gefunden.
Because it says here that the Israelites were totally in the power of the Egyptians, right?
Also es sagt, dass die Israeliten total in den Hand der Ägyptern waren.
But what did they have to do nonetheless?
Aber was mussten sie dennoch tun? Go forward.
Go forward.
Sie mussten vorangehen.
So this is something we always need to realize. We just need to go forward, no matter what. Okay.
Eine Sache, die wir immer wahrnehmen müssen. Wir müssen nur vorangehen, egal was.
Doesn't matter how much you're tempted. Doesn't matter how evil your thoughts are. Doesn't matter how many times you fell.
Es ist egal, wie oft du versucht wirst oder wie böse deine Gedanken sind oder wie oft du versagst.
Just go forward, not look back, always forward.
Geht voran, schaut nicht zurück, geht immer nur voran.
Okay. Just finish,
He
please.
did so, and lo, the sea parted, and the children of Israel passed over dry shod. Pharaoh had so long withstood God and hardened his heart against his mighty, wondrous works, that he in blindness rushed into the path which God had miraculously prepared for his people. Again Moses was commanded to stretch forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength, and the waters covered the Egyptian host, and they were drowned.
Yes.
The sea was presented to bondage to illustrate the selfish love of slavery and the desperate measures which the South would adopt to challenge the institution and the dreadful lengths which they would go before they would yield.
Okay, I'll stop here. So there's also something we can learn about Satan, right?
So, hier ist eine Sache, die wir über Satan lernen können.
And what is it?
Und was ist das? Das ist love of slavery.
Yes, okay.
Seine Liebe für die Sklaverei.
But Pharaoh, what did he do?
Aber Pharao, was tat er?
He also rushed into the waves.
Yes, and why?
So, stürmte in die Wellen hinein. Warum?
Basically, God's people, they were just to go forward, right? Never give up.
So, Gottes Volk soll vorangehen und nicht aufgeben.
But Satan, he will also never give up, okay?
Aber Satan, der wird auch nie aufgeben.
He will persecute you until the Lord finally stops him, okay?
Also er wird dich verfolgen, bis der Herr ihm letztendlich stoppt.
This is what we also need to realize. You need to go forward because Satan, he will not have mercy with you. He will persecute you until the very last moment.
Und das ist, was wir erkennen müssen. Satan wird nicht aufhören. Also der wird keine Gnade mit dir haben. Du musst vorangehen, weil er dich bis aufs Letzte verfolgen wird.
You cannot say, Satan, stop for a while. I need a 5-minute break. Okay.
Also du kannst nicht sagen, Satan, hör auf, ich brauche mal 5 Minuten.
Yeah. He will just hound you, and only the Lord can save you. Okay.
Also er wird dich jagen und nur der Herr kann dich retten.
Okay. So this is important. And we see the slave masters. They would not yield only if they were totally forced to do so. Okay.
Das können wir sehen, diese Sklaventreiber, sie würden nicht aufgeben, nur wenn sie dazu gezwungen werden.
And also these people now with this serpent bite.
Und auch diesen Menschen hier mit diesem Schlangenbiss,
You think sometimes they're total fanatics, right? When you
denkt, die sind totale Fanatiker.
and they will not stop.
Und
Okay.
sie werden nicht aufhören.
And therefore the Lord, he needs to do something great and miraculously. He needs to bring a judgment that these things can stop. Okay.
Deswegen muss der Herr was Großes und Wunderartiges machen. Er muss ein Gericht bringen, um diesen Dingen ein oder ein Ende zu machen.
Okay. So just finish, please.
The system of slavery has reduced and degraded human beings to the level of the brute. and the majority of slave masters regard them as such. The consciences of these masters have become seared and hardened, as was Pharaoh's, and if compelled to release their slaves, their principles remain unchanged, and they would make the slave feel their oppressive power if possible. It looked to me like an impossibility now for slavery to be done away. God alone can wrench the slave from the hand of his desperate, relentless oppressor. All the abuse and cruelty exercised toward the slave is justly chargeable to the upholders of the slave system, whether they be southern or northern men.
Yes. Okay. Next paragraph.
The north and the south were presented before me. The north had been deceived in regard to the south. They are better prepared for war than has been represented. Most of their men are well skilled in the use of arms, some of them from experience in battle, others from habitual sporting. They have the advantage of the north in this respect, but have not, as a general thing, the valor and the power of endurance that northern men have.
Okay, Chris.
I had a view of the disastrous battle at Manassas, Virginia. It was a most exciting, distressing scene. The Southern army had everything in their favor and were prepared for a dreadful contest. The Northern army was moving on with triumph, not doubting but that they would be victorious. Many were reckless and marched forward boastingly, as though victory were already theirs. As they neared the battlefield, many were almost fainting through weariness and want of refreshment. They did not expect so fierce an encounter. They rushed into battle and fought bravely, desperately. The dead and dying were on every side. Both the north and the south suffered severely. The southern men felt the battle, and in a little while would have been driven back still further. The northern men were rushing on, although their destruction was very great. Just then an angel descended and waved his hand backward. Instantly there was confusion in the ranks. It appeared to the northern men that their troops were retreating, when it was not so in reality, and a precipitate retreat commenced. This seemed wonderful to me.
Okay, so what do we see here?
Was sehen wir hier?
So this angel comes down from heaven, right?
Also dieser Engel kommt vom Himmel herab.
And the Lord just changes the battle completely, right?
Der Herr verändert der Kampf total.
Yes. Okay, so the northern men then were not rushing forward, but now they were retreating again.
So,
Okay.
die Nordmänner, die trieben nicht voran, sondern sie machten einen Rückzug.
Okay, and why is that?
Und warum ist das?
Let's read the next paragraph.
Lesen wir den nächsten Absatz.
Then it was explained that God had this nation in his own hands and would not suffer victories to be gained faster than he ordained, and would permit no more losses to the northern men than in his wisdom he saw fit to punish them for their sins. And had the northern army at this time pushed the battle still further in their fainting, exhausted condition, the far greater struggle and destruction which awaited them would have caused great triumph in the south. God would not permit this and sent an angel to interfere. The sudden falling back of the northern troops is a mystery to all. They know not that God's hand was in the matter.
Yes. Okay, so why did the Lord interfere?
So, warum ist der Herr eingeschritten? To save them.
Yeah, there are no unnecessary death on the part of the north.
Dass
Right?
es keinen unnützlichen Tod gebe auf Seiten des Nordens.
Because had they continued rushing forward, eventually they would have been exhausted and the southern men would have been able to slay even more.
Denn wenn sie so weiter vorangingen, sie werden letztendlich erschöpft und in den Süden hätte sie erschlagen.
Okay, so we can also see therefore in this war in Ukraine at the moment
Also wir können auch diesen Krieg in der Ukraine gerade sehen.
that the Lord he's punishing both.
Also
Okay,
der Herr bestraft beide Seiten.
he's punishing Ukraine, he's punishing Russia,
So, er bestraft den Ukraine und aber auch Russland.
and he has an exact account of what is the just punishment. Okay,
Und er hat eine genaue Berechnung, was der gerechte Bestrafung sein muss,
Mhm.
wird.
and there will not
Ist.
die one person too much. Okay,
Und es wird nicht ein Mensch zu viel sterben.
so all right. Now let's continue.
The destruction of the southern army was so great that they had no heart to boast. The sight of the dead, the dying, and the wounded gave them but little courage to triumph. This destruction, occurring when they had every advantage, and the north great disadvantage, caused them much perplexity. They know that if the north have an equal chance with them, victory is certain from the north. Their only hope is to occupy positions difficult of approach, and then have formidable arrangements to hurl destruction on every hand.
Okay, so the south realizes that they are actually much weaker.
So den Süden erkennt, dass die viel schwächer sind.
The South have strengthened themselves greatly since the rebellion first commenced. If active measures had been taken by the North, this rebellion would have been speedily crushed out. But that which was small at first has increased in strength and numbers until it has become most powerful. Other nations are intently watching this nation, for what purpose I was not informed, and are making great preparations for some event. The greatest perplexity and anxiety now exist among our national men. Pro-slavery men and traitors are in the very midst of them. And while these are professedly in favor of the Union, they have an influence in making decisions, some of which even favor the South. Okay, and then the next two paragraphs, we don't need to read them,
So die nächsten zwei Absätzen braucht man nicht zu lesen.
because it's those paragraphs where it speaks about the little time of peace. Okay,
Das sind diese Absätze, die spricht über die kleine Zeit des Friedens.
First and Second World War.
Erste und Zweite Weltkriege.
Okay, now jump down to the next chapter.
Jetzt zur nächsten Kapitel.
This is now chapter 69 called the Rebellion.
So Kapitel 69, das heißt der Rebellion.
Okay.
The dreadful state of our nation calls for deep humility on the part of God's people. The one all-important inquiry which should now engross the mind of everyone is, am I prepared for the day of God? Can I stand in the trying test before me?
Uh, 355.2. 55.2.
Under chapter 69.
I saw that God is purifying and proving his people. He will refine them as gold until the dross is consumed and his image is reflected in them. All have not that spirit of self-denial and that willingness to endure hardness and to suffer for the truth's sake, which God requires. Their wills are not subdued. They have not consecrated themselves wholly to God, seeking no greater pleasure than to do his will. Ministers and people like spirituality and true godliness. Everything is to be shaken that can be shaken. God's people will be brought into most trying positions, and all must be settled, rooted and grounded in the truth, or their steps will surely slide. If God comforts and nourishes the soul with his inspiring presence, they can endure, though the way may be dark and thorny. For the darkness will soon pass away, and the true light shine forever. I was pointed to Isaiah 58, verses 1 to 15, Jeremiah 14, verses 10 to 12, as a description of the present state of our nation. The people of this nation have forsaken and forgotten God. They have chosen other gods and followed their own corrupt ways until God has turned from them. The inhabitants of the earth have trampled upon the law of God and broken his everlasting covenant.
Okay, so when is this that the inhabitants of the earth trample upon the law of God.
So, wann ist das, wenn die Bewohner der Erde auf Gottes Gesetz treten?
Sunday law. Right?
Sonntagsgesetz.
So we can see that's this crisis where she says here it's ordained by God to purge out all these false pretenders. Okay.
Wir sehen, dass diese Krise, die von Gott bestimmt ist, um all diesen Scharlatane auszumerzen.
And it also says, the first paragraph that Mark read, it's who can stand then the trying test before us. Okay, am I prepared for the day of
Der
God?
erste Test, die Mark gelesen hat, ist, wer kann diesen Test bestehen? Wer kann sich auf den Tag des Herrn vorbereiten?
Okay, so he uses this war
So, er benutzt diesen Krieg,
to make you ready to stand in the day of God.
um
Okay.
dich vorzubereiten, am Tag des Herrn zu stehen.
Okay. Next paragraph.
Nächster Absatz.
I will show the excitement created among our people by the article and the review headed The Nation. Some understood it one way and some another.
Okay, stop here for now. Yeah, so she's referring now to an article published by the Review and Herald. Okay.
Bezieht sich auf einen Artikel, die von den Review und Herald gedruckt wurde.
And this was actually published by James White,
Und das war von James White published,
no, or he written even.
also geschrieben.
And he basically gave his estimation back then with respect to the position of Seventh-day Adventists to this civil war.
Und er hat seine Einschätzung damals gegeben über die Position der 7-Tags-Adventisten in Bezug auf den Bürgerkrieg.
And he wrote basically that if you as a Seventh-day Adventist would refuse to basically join the army when you are
Conscripted.
yes, conscripted.
Also er schrieb, dass wenn du dich weigerst, also Waffen in der Hand zu nehmen, wenn du einberufen würdest,
In this case, it would be like suicide.
so
Okay.
in diesem Fall, das wäre wie Selbstmord.
In a sense that he mentioned that you should actually do it. Okay.
Also in dem Sinne meinte er, dass du das eben tun sollst.
He said if you would say I will not do it and then get shot, this would be counted as suicide. Okay.
So, wenn du sagst, ich tue es nicht und deswegen erschossen wirst, das wäre berechnet als Selbstmord.
And his argument was basically, children, please sit down. Okay. And his argument was that it was a just cause.
Und sein
Okay.
Argument dafür war, ist, dass dieser Krieg eben eine gerechte Sache sei.
The slavery was false and the government was fighting for a just cause and it was the best government in the world and so on and so forth.
So, die Sklaverei war falsch, sie kämpften für eine gerechte Sache und das war die beste Regierung der Welt und so weiter.
And this is what she's now referring to here. Okay.
Und hierauf nimmt sie Bezug hier.
But in this chapter here, she rebukes him. Okay.
Aber in diesem Kapitel hier, sie tadelt ihn.
But obviously she does it very wisely. Okay.
Und sie tut das mit sehr viel Weisheit.
She says basically it was not false what he did in a sense to go forward
So, es war nicht falsch, was er tat, indem dass er voranging.
because at this very moment it was necessary that they made a stand, and made clear that they were against slavery.
So, in diesem Moment, es war wichtig, dass die einen klaren Stand gegen die Sklaverei machten.
But James White only had so much light, and he only went forth with the best light they had back then.
Aber James White hatte nur eine gewissen Maß an Licht und sie sind nur mit dem Licht, die sie damals hatten, vorangegangen.
But then God gave her a vision and corrected them.
Aber dann Gott hat sie eine Vision gegeben und sie zurechtgerichtet haben.
Okay, so not just to make you understand what she's referring to here.
So, nur, dass wir verstehen, worauf sie sich hier bezieht.
Okay, so you wanna just begin again from the beginning, please, of this paragraph.
So, wir lesen diesen Absatz von Anfang wieder.
I was shown the excitement created among our people by the article and the review headed The Nation. Some understood it one way and some another. The plain statements were distorted and made to mean what the writer did not intend. He gave the best light that he then had. It was necessary that something be said. The attention of many was turned to Sabbath keepers because they manifested no greater interest in the war and did not volunteer. In some places they were looked upon as sympathizing with the rebellion. The time had come for our true sentiments in relation to slavery and the rebellion to be made known. There was need of moving with wisdom to turn away the suspicions excited against Sabbath keepers. We should act with great caution, if it be possible as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. We can obey this admonition and not sacrifice one principle of our faith. Satan and his host are at war with commandment keepers, and will work to bring them into trying positions. They should not, by lack of discretion, bring themselves there.
Yes. Okay, so here you can see why it was needed that something was said. Okay.
Hier können wir sehen, warum es notwendig war, dass irgendetwas gesagt wird.
Because they were suspicious already, because nobody of the SDAs was volunteering for the war, that they were actually in favor with the South. Okay.
Sie suspicious, verdächtig. Weil sie verdachten schon, dass die 7-Tages-Adventisten bereits mit den Süden stehen, weil keiner von denen freiwillig den Krieg anschloss.
Okay. Spirit?
I was shown that some moved very indiscreetly in regard to the article mentioned. It did not in all respect accord with their views, and instead of calmly weighing the matter and viewing it in all its bearings, they became agitated, excited, and some seized the pen and jumped hastily at conclusions which would not bear investigation. Some were inconsistent and unreasonable. They did that which Satan is ever hurrying them to do, namely acted out their own rebellious feelings.
Mm-hmm.
In Iowa, they carried things to quite a length and ran into fanaticism. They mistook zeal and fanaticism for conscientiousness. Instead of being guided by reason and sound judgment, they allowed their feelings to take the lead. They were ready to become martyrs for their faith. Did all this feeling lead them to God, to greater humility before Him? Did it lead them to trust in His power to deliver them from the trying position into which they might be brought? Oh no, instead of making the petitions to the God of heaven and relying solely on His power, they petitioned the legislature and were refused. They showed their weakness and exposed their lack of faith. All this only served to bring the peculiar class, Sabbath keepers, into special notice and expose them to be crowded into difficult places by those who have no sympathy for them.
Some have been holding themselves ready to find fault and complain at any suggestion made. But few has wisdom in this most trying time to think without prejudice and candidly tell what shall be done. I saw that those who have been forward to talk so decidedly about refusing to obey a draft do not understand what they are talking about. Should they really be drafted and refusing to obey be threatened with imprisonment, torture, or death, they would shrink and then find that they had not prepared themselves for such an emergency. They would not endure the trial of their faith. What they thought to be faith was only fanatical presumption.
Those who would be best prepared to sacrifice even life, if required, rather than place themselves in a position where they could not obey God, would have the least to say. They would make no boast, they would feel deeply and meditate much, and their earnest prayers would go up to heaven for wisdom to act and grace to endure. Those who feel that in the fear of God they cannot consciously engage in this war will be very quiet, and when interrogated will simply state what they are obliged to say in order to answer the inquirer. And then let it be understood that they have no sympathy with the rebellion.
Yes. Okay, so we can see here these two different reactions, right?
Also wir können diese zwei entgegengesetzten Reaktionen hier sehen.
Yeah, some that were basically boasting and said, yeah, we should not partake in the war and even we're willing to die as martyrs if needs be.
Einige, die von sich geprahlt haben, dass wir keineswegs teil an den Krieg nehmen sollten und sogar bereit wären, unser Leben zu legen deswegen.
And this is why it says it was only fanatical presumption in their case. Okay.
Und Ellen White sagt, dass das nur fanatische Vermessenheit auf ihre Seite sei.
But those that were truly prepared to even sacrifice their life,
Aber diejenigen, die wahrlich bereit waren, sogar vielleicht ihrem Leben aufgeben zu müssen,
they were very quiet and would make no boast, no great speeches.
sie waren still und wird kein prahlisch herumprallen und keine große Aussagen machen.
And they would, it says here, meditate and pray much and ask for wisdom.
Sie werden viel beten und
And
meditieren
grace.
und um Weisheit und Gnade bitten.
Okay, so these things, it's obviously it's a most trying test, right?
So, diese Dinge, es ist eine sehr versuchende Test für uns.
Okay, so jump over this next paragraph, please.
So, überspringen wir
Warum?
diesen nächsten Absatz, diesen großen.
And just jump down to this paragraph where the next bold-faced begins.
Kommt hinab zu diesem nächsten Absatz, wo diesen fettgedruckten ist.
And there she's rebuking a brother
Und da tadelt sie einen Bruder,
who had a false understanding, who was actually sympathizing with the South.
der
Okay,
ein falsches Verständnis hat, der hat sogar Sympathie mit dem Süden.
okay, so this was.
Satan was the first great leader in rebellion. God is punishing the north that they have so long suffered the accused sin of
Accursed.
slavery.
Accursed.
Accursed, sorry.
Verflucht.
Sin of slavery to exist. For in the sight of heaven it is a sin of the darkest style. God is not with the south and he will punish them dreadfully in the end. Satan is the instigator of all rebellion. I saw that you, Brother A, have permitted your political principles to destroy your judgment and your love for the truth. They are eating out true godliness for your heart. You have never looked upon slavery in the right light, and your views of this matter have thrown you on the side of the rebellion, which was stirred up by Satan and his host. Your views of slavery cannot harmonize with the sacred, important truth for this time. You must yield your views or the truth. Both cannot be cherished in the same heart, for they are at war with each other.
Satan has been stirring you up. He would not let you rest until you should express your sentiments upon the side of the powers of darkness, thus strengthening the hands of the wicked whom God has cursed. You have cast your influence on the wrong side, with those whose course of life is to sow thorns and plant misery for others. I saw you casting your influence with a degraded company, a God-forsaken company, and angels of God fled from you in disgust. I saw that you were utterly deceived. Had you followed the light which God has given you, had you heeded the instructions of your brethren, had you listened to their advice, you would have saved yourself and saved the precious cause of truth from reproach. But notwithstanding all the light given, you have given publicity to your sentiments. Unless you undo what you have done, it will be the duty of God's people to publicly withdraw their sympathy and fellowship from you in order to save the impression which must go out in regard to us as a people. We must let it be known that we have no such ones in our fellowship, that we will not walk with them in church capacity.
Okay, so what can we see here?
So, was können wir hier sehen?
Yes, here was a brother.
Hier war ein Bruder.
And what did he do?
Und was tat er? Publicly.
Expressing them.
Yeah,
Expressing his sentiments.
he didn't understand this war correctly, right?
So, er hat diesen Krieg nicht richtig verstanden.
And he's openly sided with the wrong side.
Und
Okay.
er hat öffentlich den falschen Seite angeschlossen.
Okay, so and what would have been the result?
Und was wäre denn der Resultat?
God's people would have been tarred with the same brush.
So,
Yes.
also Schmach auf Gottes Volk würde gebracht werden. Also die werden alle in denselben Topf geworfen.
And therefore, what would have happened to him?
Und deswegen, was wäre mit ihm geschehen? Cut off from the church.
Yeah, he would have been disfellowshipped,
So,
right?
er würde von der Gemeinde ausgeschlossen.
So it shows us it's a principle, okay?
Das zeigt uns, das ist ein Prinzip.
If we don't understand these perplexing wars correctly, eventually we will be cut off from God's people. Okay.
Wenn wir diese Kriege nicht richtig verstehen, werden wir letztendlich von Gottes Volk
It
abgeschnitten
says,
werden.
can two walk together, has to be agreed.
Wenn zwei miteinander gehen, es sei denn, die übereingestimmt sind.
Okay, so also now with this war between Russia and Ukraine,
So
okay,
auch in diesem Krieg zwischen Russland und der Ukraine,
if we don't understand it correctly,
wenn wir
Okay.
es nicht richtig verstehen.
I don't think that anybody will disfellowship here anybody, okay?
Also ich glaube nicht, dass hier irgendjemand einander
Ausschließen.
ausschließen wird.
Yeah. But the Lord, He will take care of these things,
Aber
okay?
der Herr wird diese Sachen in seine Hand nehmen.
Especially if we had the opportunity to understand it correctly, but we hold on to false theories. Okay?
Besonders wenn wir die Gelegenheit hätten, es richtig zu verstehen, aber wir halten an unsere falschen Theorien fest.
But I've been told from people there are Adventists who sympathize
Yes.
with Putin
Ja.
and think that he's doing a righteous work.
Aber mir wurde gesagt, dass es gibt Adventisten, die Sympathie für Putin haben und meinen oder glauben sogar, dass er ein gerechtes Werk tut.
You know, they justify that somehow, just crazy.
Irgendwie können sie das rechtfertigen. Das ist verrückt.
And this is where we need to be careful, okay? Because if we misapply prophecy because we look at the wrong sources,
Und
okay,
hierin müssen wir sorgfältig sein, denn wenn wir die Prophetie falsch anwenden, weil wir diese falschen Quellen zur Quelle nehmen
and don't go with biblical principles,
und dass wir nicht biblischen Prinzipien befolgen,
and especially when we then also go and express these sentiments openly and advocate falsehood,
ganz besonders wenn wir diese falschen Gedanken öffentlich verkünden und Falschheiten verbreiten,
then we openly turn things upside down, okay?
dann öffentlich verdrehen wir die Sachen.
And the Lord, He will take care of these things, okay?
Und der Herr wird das in seine Hand nehmen.
If we hold fast to this error and are not willing to let go of these things.
Wenn wir an diese Irrtum festhalten und nicht bereit sind, diese Sachen loszulassen.
And as I said, I don't think that we will, anybody will disfellowship here anybody, okay?
So, wie gesagt, ich glaube nicht, dass hier jemand einander ausschließen wird.
But eventually, what happened with all these people in the past that hold fast to error,
Aber letztendlich mit all diesen Menschen in der Vergangenheit, die an ihrem Irrtum festhalten,
Different spirit controls you.
different spirit controls,
einen
okay?
anderen Geist kontrolliert dich.
And then you will leave the truth,
Und
okay?
dann wirst du die Wahrheit verlassen.
Yeah, like seeks like.
So, gleich sieht gleich.
And therefore, this is something we need to be careful of, that we would really now make sure that we pray to God that we don't follow this brother in his sentiments. Okay.
Und das ist eine Sache, den wir sorgfältig aufmerksam sollten, dass wir nicht diesen Brüder und seinen Gedanken folgen.
Okay. So now jump down to First Testimonies
So, kommt hinunter zum ersten Band der Zeugnisse, das auch First Testimonies.
361.2.
So, 361, Punkt 2.
Beginning with I was shown. Is everybody there?
Mir wurde gezeigt. Jeder da?
Okay, because now Sister White says clearly that they should not participate in this war. Okay.
Ellen White zeigt hier klar, dass sie nicht teil in diesem Krieg nehmen sollen.
Says, I was shown that God's people, who are His peculiar treasure, cannot engage in this perplexing war, for it is opposed to every principle of their faith. Okay, so war is nothing to be partaken in. In the army, they cannot obey the truth and at the same time obey the requirements of their officers. That's impossible. There would be a continual violation of conscience. Worldly men are governed by worldly principles. They cannot appreciate no other. Worldly policy and public opinion comprise the principle of action that governs them and leads them to practice the form of right doing. But God's people cannot be governed by these motives. The words and commands of God, written in the soul, are spirit and life, and there is power in them to bring into subjection and enforce obedience. The 10 precepts of Jehovah are the foundation of all righteous and good laws. Those who love God's commandments will conform to every good law of the land. But if the requirements of the rulers are such as conflict with the laws of God, the only question to be settled is, shall we obey God or man? Okay, so here we can clearly see, this is why it says James White was not correct in what he said.
So hier können wir klar sehen, sagt Ellen White, dass James White nicht richtig war in das, was er sagt.
Okay, so therefore, even though it was a righteous cause, at least officially,
So, obwohl das eine gerechte Sache sei, zumindest öffentlich,
you're still not to participate in such a war. Okay,
du sollst dennoch nicht in so einen Krieg teilnehmen,
if you're an Adventist.
wenn du ein Adventist bist.
Okay, so now jump down
So, kommt hinunter
and go to the next bold-faced.
zum nächsten Fettgedruckten.
And this speaks now about these various men in authority, in generals and officers. Okay,
Er spricht über diesen Männer in Position der Autorität, Generale und Offiziere.
and these things obviously take place also today. Okay,
Und diese Dinge finden auch heutzutage statt.
okay. Mark, you want to read this paragraph, please?
Very many men in authority, generals and officers, act in conformity with instructions communicated by spirits. The spirits of devils, professing to be dead warriors and skillful generals, communicate with men in authority and control many of their movements. One general has direction from these spirits to make special moves and is flattered with the hope of success. Another receives directions which differ widely from those given to the first. Sometimes those who follow the directions given obtain a victory, but more frequently they meet with defeat.
Okay, next paragraph, please.
Nächster Absatz.
The spirits sometimes give these leading men an account of events to transpire in battles in which they are about to engage, and of individuals who will fall in the battle. Sometimes it is found to be as these spirits foretold, and this strengthens the faith of the believers in spiritual manifestations. And again it is found that correct information has not been given, but the deceiving spirits make some explanation which is received. The deception of our minds is so great that many fail to perceive the lying spirits, which are leading them on to certain destruction.
Okay, so here we can see that spiritualism takes place among these officers.
So,
Okay?
hier können wir sehen, dass Spiritismus findet statt unter diesen Offizieren.
And then they make moves that are totally stupid, let's say. Okay.
Und dann machen sie Sachen an der Kampfwelt, die letztendlich blöd sind, also verrückt sind.
And you can be sure that when you see now Russia, how they came into Ukraine,
Und ihr konntet sehen zum Beispiel, wie Russland in der Ukraine hineinkam.
probably most of us could direct these battlements better than they did. Okay.
Wahrscheinlich die meisten von uns hätten diesen Krieg besser führen können als diese Anführer.
Okay, so it was totally disorganized and total chaos. Okay.
Es war desorganisiert, es war totaler Chaos.
You can be sure that these spirits directed their tanks.
Ihr
Okay.
konntet sicher sein, dass diesen Geistern, deren Panzern geführt haben.
Okay, because when you now jump down to this next bold-faced,
Denn wenn du hinunterkommst zu diesem nächsten fettgedrückten Teil,
this is where she gives us an explanation.
hier
Okay.
gibt es hier diese Erklärung.
Everybody there?
Jeder da?
It's beginning with Satan has.
Satan hat.
Satan has, through his angels, communicated with officers who were cool, calculating men when left to themselves, and they have given up their own judgment and have been led by these lying spirits into very difficult places, where they have been repulsed with dreadful slaughter. It suits his satanic majesty well to see slaughter and carnage upon the earth. He loves to see the poor soldiers mowed down like grass. I saw that the rebels have often been in positions where they could have been subdued without much effort, but the communications from spirits have led the northern generals and blinded their eyes until the rebels were beyond their reach. And some generals would rather allow the rebels to escape than to subdue them. They think more of the darling institution of slavery than of the prosperity of the nation. These are among the reasons why the war is so protracted.
Yes. Okay, so here we can see that these officers made these movements because they were directed by these devils.
So
Okay.
können wir sehen, diese Offiziere haben diesen Sachen getan, weil sie von Teufeln angeführt wurden.
And Satan obviously he wants to kill as many as possible because then he has them for sure, right?
He has what?
He has them for certain.
Has them for certain.
Yes.
Also Satan möchte natürlich so viele wie möglich töten, weil dann hat er sie sicher.
Okay. Okay, so just jump down to. You can jump over the next paragraph.
Überspringen wir den
Oh,
nächsten.
no, let's read this
Oder
also.
doch nicht.
Let's just read the rest and then we are done.
Lesen wir einfach den Rest.
Information sent by our generals to Washington concerning the movement of our armies might nearly are as well to be telegraphed directly to the rebel forces. There are rebel sympathizers right at the heart of the Union authorities. This war is unlike any other. The great lack of union of feeling and acting makes it look dark and discouraging. Many of the soldiers have thrown off restraint and have sunk to an alarming state of degradation. How can God go forth with such a corrupt army? How can He, according to His honor, defeat their enemies and lead them on to victory? There is discord and strife for honor, while the poor soldiers are dying by thousands in the battlefield, or for their wounds and from exposure and hardship.
Yes. Okay.
This war is a most singular and at the same time a most horrible and heart-sickening conflict. Other nations are looking on with disgust at the transactions of the armies of both North and South. They see such a determined effort to protect the war at an enormous sacrifice of life and money, while at the same time nothing is really gained, and that it looks to them like a strife to see which can kill the most men. They are indignant.
I saw that the rebellion had been steadily increasing and that it had never been more determined than at the present moment. Many professed Union men holding important positions are disloyal at heart. Their only object in taking up arms was to preserve the Union as it was and slavery with it. They would heartily chain down the slave to his life of galling bondage had they the privilege. Such have a strong degree of sympathy with the South. Blood has been poured out like water, and for naught. In every town and village there is mourning. Wives are mourning for their husbands, mothers for their sons, and sisters for their brothers. But notwithstanding all this suffering, they do not turn to God.
I saw that both the South and the North were being punished. In regard to the South, I was referred to Deuteronomy 32 and so on. To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste. For the Lord shall judge his people, and repent himself for his servants, when he seeth that their power is gone, and there is none shut up or left. And he shall say, where are their gods, their rock in whom they trusted?
Yes. Okay, so here we can see that the Lord was punishing both,
So
right?
hier können wir sehen, dass der Herr beide Seiten bestraft
And
hat.
eventually punished the South more to be defeated. Okay.
Und letztendlich bestrafte er den Süden mehr, dass sie besiegt würden.
But what can we see?
Aber was können wir sehen?
In both camps there were evil men. Okay.
So, in beiden Lagern gab es böse Männer.
So you cannot just go by, look, there's a corrupt officers and corrupt people. They are basically sellouts and all these things. Okay.
That didn't make sense, sorry.
Okay. So you cannot just go and say and look at these people and say, look, there are these corrupt people in high positions. Okay.
Du kannst nicht hingehen und sagen, schaut mal diese Personen in hohen Positionen an und sagen, sie sind korrupt.
Yeah, and therefore, they must be evil.
So deswegen mussten sie böse sein.
Yeah, they are evil, okay, but
Also die sind es zwar,
but the north still was more righteous than the south in
aber
God's
der
eyes. Okay.
Norden in Gottes Augen waren mehr gerecht als, als den Süden.
What I mean with that is, for instance, in Ukraine, you can be sure that there are many evil people also in the high positions.
Was
Okay.
ich damit meine, ist, dass in Ukraine, ihr konntet sicher sein, dass es viele böse Menschen gibt in hohe Positionen.
But we must not look at these individuals that are corrupt, okay?
Aber wir sollten nicht diese Einzelpersonen anschauen, die korrupt sind.
But we should look at the broader picture. What is the Lord trying to illustrate? Okay.
Aber wir sollten das Gesamtbild anschauen und uns fragen, was möchte der Herr uns hier zeigen?
And even, for instance, in the Civil War, you had the North against the South, right?
Und in den Bürgerkrieg hattest du den Norden gegen Süden.
And the North was actually to illustrate Christ's kingdom,
Und
right?
das Norden sollte Christi Königreich darstellen.
Yeah, but were they perfectly representing it?
Aber haben sie das perfekt dargestellt?
No.
Nein,
Okay.
bloß nicht.
But still, they illustrated this, okay?
Aber dennoch stellten sie es dar.
They were more righteous than the South,
Sie
okay?
waren mehr gerecht als den Süden.
So at the moment, yeah, the Ukraine, you cannot say they are guiltless, okay, and they are like these
Im Moment in
holy people.
Ukraine kannst du nicht sagen, dass die schuldlos sind, dass das sind heilige Menschen.
And there are obviously corrupt people in high places, okay?
Es gibt natürlich korrupte Menschen in hohen Ämtern,
Yeah, but you must look at the illustration. What is the Lord trying to teach us at the moment on the national scale,
wir
okay?
mussten den Darstellungen anschauen und versuchen herauszufinden, was der Herr uns auf der nationalen Ebene zeigen möchte.
Yes. And then you can see how Putin wants to oppress Ukraine, okay?
Wir können sehen, wie Putin den Ukraine unterdrücken möchte.
And how he started this war and trying now to, yeah, I mean, he destroys the cities.
Und wie er diesen Krieg anstiftete und wie er die Städte zerstört.
Yeah. And he's the one illustrating the work of Satan. He wants
Er ist
to
derjenige,
keep them
der
in slavery.
das Werk Satan darstellt. Er möchte sie in der Gefangenschaft halten.
Okay, and this has nothing to do with that Ukraine also has a lot of dirt on their hands. Okay,
Und das hat nichts damit zu tun, dass Ukraine auch Schmutz an deren Händen haben.
and therefore both get punished at the moment.
Und
Okay?
deswegen beide werden im Moment bestraft.
But eventually,
Aber letztendlich,
the one who plays now the role of Satan,
derjenige, der die Rolle Satan spielt,
he will be punished at the end.
er wird am Ende bestraft werden.
And this is Putin.
Und das ist Putin.
And this is something we need to recognize.
Und das ist, was wir erkennen müssen.
Okay, so I hope that we could see at least these different dynamics.
Ich hoffe zumindest, wir konnten diese verschiedenen Dynamiken erkennen.
And we can see many parallels also to this current war
Und wir können viele
and these
Parallele
principles.
sehen in ihren Prinzipien zu diesem jetzigen Krieg.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, good. Then I would say let's close with our prayer.
Dann lasst uns mit unserer Gebetsrunde schließen.